For years, we've been absolutely flooded with political commentary on Donald Trump. But what if the best way to understand him isn't political at all? What if it's psychological? Well, today we're digging into a book that makes exactly that case. It's basically a psychological user manual for one of the most talked about figures of our time.
So the book kicks off with a really bold claim that all the usual tools we use, moral outrage, political analysis, even constant fact-checking, they've all been completely useless. It's kind of like trying to fix a software bug by just yelling at your computer screen. The idea here is that unless you understand the underlying code, you're just reacting to what's on the screen. You can't actually predict what it's going to do next.
And take a look at this number, over 30,000. That's how many documented false or misleading claims were made during his presidency. When a number gets that high, you start to realize that just saying that's not true over and over again, well, it just wasn't going to work. According to this book, that's because the statements were never really about facts to begin with. This quote is really the key to the whole thing. The goal of this analysis isn't to justify any of the behavior, not at all. It's to build a model that can actually anticipate it. The author makes a pretty stark comparison. You can look at a serial killer's abusive childhood to explain his pathology, but that in no way excuses the murders. The same principle, he argues, applies here.
So that's the big question, right? What exactly is this psychological framework the book is talking about? How does it propose we understand this uniquely disruptive figure? Well, it's a journey that starts not in the White House, but in a childhood home in Queens.
All right, section 1. The foundation. The whole analysis really starts from this idea that, hey, if you want to understand the man, you've got to go all the way back and understand the child. The book traces his core behaviors back to a series of really specific formative wounds. The book lays out 4 key wounds. First off, when he was just 2.5, his mother nearly died and was gone for about a year, creating what the book calls a deep sense of abandonment. Second, you have his father, Fred, who had this relentless demand for his sons to be killers and would punish any sign of kindness or weakness. Third, he had to watch as his older brother, Freddie, who was by all accounts a kind, gentle person, was just systematically broken by their father's disapproval, which eventually led to his death from alcoholism. And finally, at just 13 years old, he was sent away to a harsh military academy, which pretty much cemented his view that the world is a hostile, unforgiving place. Now, this isn't just some pop psychology, The book actually uses a real clinical framework called Adverse Childhood Experiences, or ACEs for short. Think of it as a tool that doctors use to connect trauma in early life to really predictable adult outcomes, everything from health problems to very specific behavioral patterns. The argument is that these early wounds aren't just backstory, they're literally the source code for the adults. So you have these deep, formative wounds. How do they actually build the man? Well, the author argues they didn't just influence him, they created a psychological architecture that is rigid and totally unchanging. And here's a huge point in the book. The claim that his emotional development just stopped. It froze. The defenses that a little kid built to survive in a chaotic, threatening home became the permanent operating system for the adult. And you don't even have to take the author's word for it. He says it himself. He sees this consistency not as a flaw, but as a point of pride. This quote is presented as a key piece of evidence that the system, that software, it has never been updated. So how does this operating system actually work? The book gives it a name, the dominance machine. It's described as a narcissistic system that is psychologically incapable of processing loss. So, to protect a very fragile ego, it splits the entire world into a simple binary. You are either a wonderful ally who praises him, or you're a terrible enemy who must be destroyed. There is no middle ground. None. And running in the background all the time is something the book calls the vengeance algorithm. It's this mechanism that records every single perceived slight, no matter how small, and it's always working to find a way to get retribution. And the crucial part is there's no statute of limitations. A grievance from 30 years ago is just as fresh as one from yesterday. And all that leads right into this third pattern, the loyalty trap. This is the demand for absolute, but totally one-way loyalty. People around him are constantly tested, often forced to trash their own principles just to prove they're on the team. But because that loyalty only flows in one direction, they are inevitably devalued and just tossed aside the second they're no longer useful. Okay, so we've identified these really rigid patterns, but this isn't just about looking back. The whole point here is about looking forward.
If the code is fixed, then the output becomes predictable.
And the author is really clear on this. This isn't some crystal ball gazing or speculation. It's just pattern recognition based on 7 decades of incredibly consistent public behavior. The argument is simple. The man we've seen for the last 8 years is the same man who's existed since he was a kid, and he's the same man who will exist tomorrow.
And this leads to some very specific, high-confidence predictions. That he is structurally incapable of ever admitting a mistake. That truth will always be whatever serves him in the moment. That he will seek to punish his enemies, that another term would be staffed only by absolute loyalists, and that the campaign rallies will never, ever stop, because they're not really a political tool. They're a deep psychological need.
So where does all of this leave us? I mean, how is history ultimately going to make sense of this entire era? The book finishes by looking ahead to that very question. And the ultimate thesis is this: when future historians try to piece this all together, they're going to find that the usual political science frameworks just don't cut it. They will have to turn to psychology to truly explain how and why everything happened the way it did. And here's how the book boils it all down. In one incredibly powerful sentence, it draws a direct line from the personal trauma of the child to the political trauma of a nation, arguing you just can't understand one without understanding the other. And so we come full circle, right back to that core principle of the entire analysis. The framework we've been talking about is offered as a tool for comprehension, not for absolution. But the book leaves us with one last, kind of haunting question. If these patterns were really this clear, this consistent, and this predictable all along, what does that say about all of us, that we failed to see it until it was too late?